I'm Dennis Rodoni. I'm District 4 Supervisor here in Marin County, representing beautiful Stinson Beach and all of West Marin. I want to welcome you here tonight to have this very interesting conversation. You know, probably 2 years ago, we wouldn't have even thought about what microgrids were or what having a conversation like this. And to see the great turnout like we have tonight is really amazing, the interest in this. You know, as our world has changed, even though federal government doesn't want to recognize that climate change is a reality, we all do, and we see it every day here in Stinson in particular, and in the county, and throughout California, with the fires, reading about and seeing on the news channels, the hurricanes. We know that climate is changing, and then just last weekend with PG&E shutting off the power to 50, 60,000 people in the North Bay and Lake County, we recognize that times have changed and what we do has to change and the methods that we use have to change. So I want to thank Peter for starting this discussion and continuing this discussion. Microgrids can play an important role in our communities, in our daily life, and also in the case of emergencies. So I'm interested in hearing the conversation tonight. Thank you all for being here. And I'll turn this over to Peter.
Welcome, everybody. I'm glad so many of you could make it out here. Before I get into the slide presentation, just wanted to give you a little bit of context, a short little history lesson. Over 10 years ago, we did an event here at the same community center called Stinson Solar Sunday. We got a lot of folks out here, and it was so inspirational that it ended up convincing the local community center here to install a solar system, as well as the Bolinas Community Center and the Point Reyes Community Center. The Point Reyes Community Center was the only one to install a battery at that time, so they in essence created a small microgrid, which has been operating fine for over 10 years. So part of the purpose of today's event is to sort of educate you about microgrids, batteries, and maybe why we should now try to create a microgrid here in Stinson Beach as well. But first of all, what exactly is a microgrid? There is an official government definition. It's a mouthful, but let me read it and then try to decipher what it means. An integrated energy system consisting of distributed energy resources and multiple energy loads operating as a single controllable entity in parallel to or islanded from the existing power grid. Now the key phrase there is islanded. It's called islanding. So right now this solar system here, if the grid goes down, it goes down too. We do have a propane generator which can fire up. But if there was a long-term emergency, we might run out of fuel. And so the idea of the microgrid is you can be connected to the grid, but if there's an emergency, we island from the grid and we can have power. And if you have a battery, solar, and a generator, you can in essence have indefinite power. So microgrids, they're not that simple. There's this slide here, over here shows that there's a lot of stakeholders involved. There's the community. There's the macro grid, the PG&E grid, if you will. There's the companies that supply the components. And then there's the government officials, the constraint makers, the incentive makers, and then there's the user, which would be this community center itself. There's a more complicated version of this slide that shows 100 different arrows showing all different kinds of relationships, but I think you get the idea. There's a lot of stakeholders involved. So we're going to look now at some data about microgrids, and this is basically looking at the world market. And notice that North America and Asia Pacific are the two largest markets. In Asia Pacific, that's much more remote power systems, places like India where there isn't a grid, so you need power from microgrids. In North America, most of the microgrids are actually connected to the grid, with the exception of places like Alaska. But for the most part, they're things like military bases. Some of them are actually deployed by utilities themselves. On this next slide here, you're going to see that the remote microgrids, if you look at the global market, are still the largest market with about 39%. And then after that, we have commercial and industrial that are going to be businesses, things like data centers that need to have power all the time. And then the community segment is basically 8%. That's where this microgrid, if we build one here, would fall under. This would be a community microgrid. And you can see the other categories there: institutional campus like hospitals, military, and then actually microgrids deployed by utilities. We call them utility distribution microgrids. So what kind of resources go into microgrids? Here's a chart showing from last year. This is a snapshot in time. The number one resource is called combined heat and power. So that's the idea that even if you burn fossil fuels, you not only get electricity, you get thermal energy. And so that's important for hospitals and college campuses, stuff like that. But coming in number two is solar PV, which just basically beats out diesel generators. And then you can see other technologies: wind power, for example, biomass, hydroelectricity, and then energy storage. But if you jump ahead out to 2027, you'll see now that the mix has changed. And in fact, solar PV is by far the largest contributor with 29%, and then energy storage is 25%. And that's really the trend, that it's solar and batteries that are sort of taking over not only microgrids, but that's sort of the preferred way to generate on-site power. And so that's kind of what the future lies, and we here could become part of that trend by installing a battery, so we'd have a solar battery and then a propane generator backup for our microgrid. And here's why people are turning to solar. Notice how the costs of solar have declined dramatically. It's going down. What's interesting is that every forecast of solar energy has been wrong. They've all underestimated how fast the power cost is going to decline. And if you see here on the next slide, the same thing is now happening with batteries. Here are three kinds of batteries. The one in the middle, advanced lead acid, that's the most common one we're familiar with. We have lead acid batteries in our cars. That's sort of been the traditional battery technology. But the one that's really getting the most attention today is lithium-ion batteries. And that's because they're in electric vehicles, they're in our cell phones, they're in our laptops, but now they're going into microgrids. And the other reason why they're popular, so they're lower in cost because there's been so much investment in them, but they can kind of do the most amount of things you want a battery to do. They're sort of in the middle. They can do what's called power, when you need little short bursts of energy, and they can also store energy over a longer term. The other type of battery we have here is called a flow battery, which can really store power over really long periods of time, 4 to 6 hours. And those will probably become more important, especially here in California when we move to 100% clean energy, because we have that new law that Governor Brown just signed. So here's a map looking at the US, and I was really surprised to find this out, but that California has had the most power outages of any state, and it's been that way for 9 years in a row. Last year we had over 200 power outages. Now on the East Coast they've have longer duration power outages because of the hurricanes, but we have a lot of power outages, and that's one reason why microgrids are becoming they're becoming more pervasive here in California, especially in the Bay Area with Silicon Valley companies. And you can look at the other states. Notice a lot of the states on the East Coast also have a lot of power outages. We have New York, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. Texas also has a lot of power outages. And for some reason here, actually Alaska and Hawaii don't have a lot of power outages, but they are major microgrid markets just because there's not a lot of ways to share electricity. Those are more remote microgrids where they're basically operating in island mode all of the time. So why build a microgrid? Here's a chart looking at sort of summing up a project that we at Navigant did with the California Energy Commission. We did 26 case studies, and we asked people, why did they build a microgrid? Was it reliability? Was it saving money? What was it? Reducing carbon footprint. And here on the next slide, you'll see that in California, the number one reason people build a microgrid is to integrate renewable energy. That's primarily solar energy, although it can be wind power as well. And then after that comes resiliency, and then after that, tied with resiliency, are bill savings. So microgrids, they might cost something to build, but they can also save you money because you can store your energy in a battery. Let's say on a hot, sunny afternoon when the power on the grid is expensive, you can generate your own energy stored in a battery and actually not take power from the grid. So there's other reasons you might want to have a microgrid. You might also want to reduce your carbon footprint, or you might actually want to sell extra energy to the larger grid. So these are the key questions now. Why are we here? So what are the challenges facing community microgrids? Number one, how's the best way to streamline the design and implementation? Then can we reduce the engineering costs? There's this new concept, microgrid in a box. Can you put them together like Lego blocks? We're not quite there yet, but there's a lot of companies moving in that direction. What kind of battery makes the most economic sense for a place like this community center? Is it lithium ion? Are there different kinds of lithium ion batteries? Then how best to help communities create microgrids? How can we find the funding for them? And then how can communities and local public agencies like water districts, fire departments, how can they best collaborate? And then can microgrids really stimulate a broader approach to community resiliency? Another concept that came up over 10 years ago, and Ty Cashman is here in the room, he came up with this phrase of a solar safety net. The idea that what if you had batteries scattered throughout the community at key locations at sort of neighborhood level, where if there was a grid outage, you'd have the centralized microgrid here at the community center, but you might also have some scattered out, and maybe that would even be an informal arrangement with your neighbors. You know, there's someone who has a serious health issue. If there's a power outage, you might check on them. You might just say, you know, come to my house if the grid goes down. So that's something that could be investigated over the longer term, but it could also just be an informal network. And then what about Stinson Beach? So we have here some photographs that Maury Nelson took. Richard Reisner also developed some maps. How much solar is in Stinson Beach? We did a survey back in 2008 that showed there were 21 solar systems at that point in time. Now, we're not sure if this data is completely accurate. It's really hard to tell. Maury actually got in his airplane and took photographs. You can take a look at them over there on the table, and he identifies where they are. And so he shows about 51 solar systems currently operating in Stinson Beach. Most of them are in Seadrift, which is a gated community. But interestingly enough, they are in a private subdivision, and you might even be able to create a microgrid there because you're not having to deal with some regulatory issues that impact public roads. And then also, a lot of the key communities here already have solar systems. This community center, the water district has installed solar, and the fire building right next door also has solar. So if we assume that there's 300 watts per solar panel, the total amount of clean solar energy in Stinson Beach is about 1/3 of a megawatt. Now that might not mean a lot to a lot of you, but that's essentially enough power for 300 homes in California, average-sized homes, which is actually greater than the population here in Stinson Beach. So theoretically, we could power up everyone in Stinson Beach with solar energy if we are only allowed to do that. And so where should a new battery be installed here in Stinson Beach to integrate with the solar and the battery? Should it be here at the community center? I'm sort of arguing that maybe that should be the case. And with that, that's the end of our PowerPoint. Let's bring up the panelists and let's continue the discussion and talk about microgrids.
Yeah. My name is John Sarter, and my company is called Off the Grid Design and also Sarter Construction and Design. I've been in the design build industry for 32 years and always been a sustainable builder, but in the last several years I've begun integrating not only renewable energy but electric vehicles into my structures and systems. So they're sort of a cohesive system of living and transportation energy that is all carbon neutral by virtue of the solar on the roof.
Well, tell us, let's go with Vipul Gore.
Vipul Gore from Gridscape Solutions. We are a startup in Fremont, down south from here. We have actually deployed microgrids at the fire stations, and now we are deploying them at few city halls and police headquarters departments. All of these are considered to be critical facilities, and so in our microgrid system we have a solar system, a carport system with a battery system. We'll also integrate the diesel generator that is on site with our system, and now we also include electric vehicle charging systems in it, and specifically vehicle to grid, so you can actually connect your car, and it will normally get power from the sun when your grid connected is operating normally. But let's say you really are in a microgrid mode, you are completely out of the grid, and your solar is down, maybe it's night time, and the battery is depleted. Then you can also use the car to power the fire station or that building. So we are working on those kind of technologies, and we have deployed few sites in Fremont, and now we are doing 5 fire stations in Stockton, a few of them in Fontana in Southern California, and city of Richmond, and a few other cities in the whole peninsula. So
we started off really focusing a lot on off-grid energy storage, because off-grid is a very mature market. These type of technologies we're going to talk about tonight, even though you may not have seen them or actually known that you're experiencing them, they're not a new technology. They've been around for a long time, and so I think that's hopefully something that we can do tonight is get you more familiar and comfortable with them, so that you can really understand the benefits they can provide to you as a community. So we've been doing a lot of work in Puerto Rico on the rebuild there since the grid was destroyed after Hurricane Maria. There's a lot of folks down there, and they're all needed and all hands on deck. So we've been doing projects including water pumping, because if your water pumps run on electricity and you lose power, you have no water. We've also been doing some community centers, some community evacuation centers. There's all these schools which were designated for evacuation areas, and they have no backup power. So after the hurricane, there was really no reason to go to the evacuation center. So we're doing solar plus storage resiliency on those schools. That's a lot of projects there. And then also seeing businesses that want to have their own energy independence or resilience. So sometimes it's batteries only. You don't have to have all this other stuff. Sometimes it's a generator plus a battery, and sometimes it's the whole thing: solar, batteries, generator, all that stuff. So different flavors of like what the benefits are and what you might choose to do that with. Hopefully we can get into that a little bit more.
From the beginning, we've been focused on not only doing solar, but also building microgrids. So our oldest systems are 13 years old, microgrid systems. Every system we've ever installed is still operating very well and doing its job, solar and battery systems. It's not something to be intimidated by, and it's a really great opportunity for resiliency, now for saving money. There are a number of ways to deploy it. There's so much new opportunities, so many new products coming onto the market now, and from some really great companies. But very happy to be here and look forward to hearing what everybody has to say.
You've probably heard of Tesla versus Edison, the current war, right? Many years ago, and Tesla was the one for the AC power, Edison for the DC power, and at that time Tesla won, right? So this is changing now. Just a little bit of a background. Solar is generating direct current power. Batteries, which are now becoming a very important piece of distributed energy storage, they work on direct current. More and more devices around you. The cell phone. You connect it to the wall, but actually you go through power conversion from alternating current into direct current, right? But the device itself actually uses direct current. So with the technological changes in the world, more and more things around us, especially in distributed energy world, are using direct current. So going back to the 0%, I represent a startup. We're 7 years old from Ontario, Canada, which is working on technologies which are integrating distributed energy resources in a microgrid configuration based on a DC direct current network. Unlike some of the participants here, my experience goes back with electrical world only to 7 years ago. So 7 years ago, when somebody would tell me about direct current and AC and DC and microgrids, I'm like, okay, right? But I felt like renewable energy is something which has to change the world, right? And I felt like the traditional structure of electrical systems, which was designed more than 100 years ago and stayed the same, something has to be happening. And that was the moment when I decided to invest my own money in new ideas in that area I had no clue about, right? And here I am, one of the leading developers of direct current technologies, and thank you, Peter, for inviting me.
First of all, the big opportunity, and I think the most important thing for these community organizations for critical operations, is to be considering resiliency. There's all this discussion about preparedness and being ready for, Marin, get ready, the signs everywhere. This is a really critical opportunity for us right now, before something happens, to put a system in place that can leverage the solar, which is a generator, with a good battery system, with the propane generator, so you basically have an indefinitely sustainable power source that the system could run for years if it needed to. And I know that that's not the likely case that we're planning for, but you never know what that case is going to be. And to not have anything to back the facility up until you run out of your propane tank just isn't responsible in reality, and especially for emergency operations, for firehouses, for water districts. These operations, these are critical to our society, and to not have that power is, it's just not right anymore. We have a way to do it. It's totally affordable. Modern systems don't just provide backup power at this point. You can also leverage these very same systems to be doing demand mitigation or load shifting.
Now remember, they're not a technical audience.
Yeah, well, sorry. We won't get too technical, but there's a way to leverage these batteries to take the energy that you produce or use in the evenings and charge your batteries in the mornings when electricity is cheap, and use some of the battery in the evenings to be able to discharge. So there's actually an economic benefit to batteries in addition to the critical resiliency that they provide. And that's something that's pretty new to the market and pretty exciting. There are a number of companies that are providing platforms. Tesla's all over the news, and they probably are the closest one to a battery in a box kind of thing. But at the end of the day, when you're talking about that, the issue isn't the battery as much as the physical integration, because every facility is unique. Its loads are unique. Its electric panel is different. The generator is different. So you do need to do a little bit of engineering still. And with new construction, with some of the stuff that John's doing, we do a lot of new construction, not as much working with contractors. There's an opportunity to integrate it from the beginning. So, but the bottom line is that putting a battery system in a microgrid system into a community center, you're leveraging so much of the investment you've already made. It's an incremental additional investment for a very important resource. So,
if I have solar on my roof and I have a battery that I can store power in, is that what I am looking to do if I want to be able to survive in a power outage?
In the most basic sense, I guess you could say yes, but
Repeat the question.
Oh, the question is, we have a lot of homes here in Stinson. We've chronicled how many of them have solar, but it's true that if the grid goes down, this community center, the community center and the water district and the fire station have backup generators, so they would still have power as long as there was fuel. So, but if, let's say, there was an earthquake, or let's say PG&E were in a high fire danger and PG&E shuts off the power for a week, we could run out of that fuel in even the community centers. But in terms of homes, it is basically a battery, but then it's also about how, do you want power for a full day, 2 days? So that's all about sizing the battery, how much resiliency do you want? A lot of the batteries installed might last 4 hours. Most power outages aren't that long, so it's also kind of you deciding how much resiliency do you want. That's at a very high level. Let's let some Bipple hasn't spoken about. Let's let.
So you asked about some practical approaches. So there are two, right? So one is what John has done is you could basically create your own grid for your own house, right? So you got solar, you got an inverter that converts that solar and connects to the grid, and you put a battery system, and then you have to have some kind of smartness, smart controller we call it, that basically senses whether I'm connected or I'm not connected to PG&E. If you're not connected, it will basically cut you off and then it will run internally. So that's one approach. It's possible today. John has already done it in the San Francisco apartment. It's expensive a little bit to do it today, but the prices will come down. Battery prices are coming down. We have makers of the batteries who are doing that. The second approach is in a community, from a community perspective, you want to, at least for every city or every neighborhood, you want to have a place where you can shelter people, right? In case of a disaster or in case of a long-term outage, right? We are dealing with some cities, there is only one feeder. I mean, talk about Portola Valley, right?
Explain what a feeder is.
Yeah, there's one line coming from the PG&E, from mains, from the substation. Only one line, and something fire or something knocks that out, the whole community, 700 homes are basically out of the power. And what do you do in that kind of situation? So the projects that we are involved in is you take a community center like this or a firehouse just adjacent to it, and then as Peter mentioned, we'll actually create local power here. Clean power using solar panels, battery systems, and all of that. So that people can assemble, there will be basic amenities available, food, water, shelter, all of that is available until the main line is restored. So I think there are two approaches. You can do a per house basis, and every community needs to be thinking of doing it at a community level as well. Frank and I are involved in multiple projects in multiple cities where they are thinking of actually creating these kind of emergency shelters everywhere in every city. It's possible today, and you can do it with completely clean power without any problem.
But the energy source during that disaster, when the line is cut,
Yeah.
so you got the 750 homes without power. The residents are then going to have to come to the community center, and maybe they can charge their phone or do small electronics like that. But there's no transference of the energy back to the houses. The energy is used here, so food storage, things like that, would all have to happen in the community center.
Yeah, so the question is, sorry?
Oh, I was going to answer that, but that.
Oh, yeah. No, I was going to repeat the question. Yeah, the question is that, you have power in the community, but how do you take that power to the homes around it? So, yeah, there is.
So I'd like to jump in here for a moment. So there are, for your individual example, you were asking what would you need, and the answer is a small battery system will be able to provide power for a few things in your home, coupled with attached with your solar. So if the grid goes away, if there's a blackout for a short term or long term, you're going to have the ability to charge your small battery to be able to run things like a refrigerator, some lights, communications, charging small devices. So even a very small battery is going to be enough for you to get a long way, the very basic functions. Okay, and we've done a couple hundred of these systems, and it's always about, and Peter was talking about this, balancing how much solar you have with how much batteries that you have is really a function of how much are you trying to back up.
Right.
Do you just want your refrigerator and a couple of light bulbs, or do you want the fountains in the pool running? So you can, and we've done every version of that.
But following up, eventually 4 hours. So assume that the situation that he asked, where you have your own home, you have your solar, and then you have a battery. Maybe I just don't understand the concept, but I thought the solar keeps coming every day
Yes.
and refilling the battery. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Therefore, you have more than 4 hours, assuming we have several days of sun during a catastrophe after.
That's right, and part of it, of course, is designing the system to accommodate, because if the power is going to go out when it's stormy and it's dark and it's winter, that's when our power goes out. So counting on the solar entirely isn't enough. We've never designed a system with a 4-hour runtime. That's more like commercial applications where they're trying to offset load shifting and demand mitigation. Sorry, yeah. So the point is, when we design a system, or when any of us will design a system, we're going to be aiming at numbers of days. Right. And we always do the calculation based on no solar. So here's your very worst case scenario, but you're always going to get a little something from your solar system. And so I'm going to give this back to Peter now, but it's totally viable. Oh, here you go, John.
So in our building, for instance, we wanted to have everything backed up. We wanted to have everything backed up in our building. So we have 3 batteries per unit, and that's a total of 40.5 kilowatt hours. Each unit is using about 20 kilowatt hours a day. So that's 2 full days of battery backup that's constantly being repowered every day by the sun. So since we commissioned the building, we haven't drawn any power at all from the grid. It's essentially, it's grid tied, but we're not using grid power at this point. So it just depends on what you want to have operating when the power goes up.
This is a really critical opportunity for us right now, before something happens, to put a system in place that can leverage the solar, which is a generator, with a good battery system, with the propane generator. So you basically have an indefinitely sustainable power source that the system could run for years if it needed to. And I know that that's not the likely case that we're planning for, but you never know what that case is going to be. And to not have anything to back the facility up until you run out of your propane tank just isn't responsible in reality, and especially for emergency operations, for firehouses, for water districts. These operations, these are critical to our society, and to not have that power is, it's just not right anymore. We have a way to do it. It's totally affordable. Modern systems don't just provide backup power at this point. You can also leverage these very same systems to be doing demand mitigation or load shifting.
Now remember, they're not a technical audience.
Yeah, well, sorry. I won't get too technical, but there's a way to leverage these batteries to take the energy that you produce or use in the evenings and charge your batteries in the mornings when electricity is cheap, and use some of the battery in the evenings to be able to discharge. So there's actually an economic benefit to batteries in addition to the critical resiliency that they provide.
What I think people are kind of looking to Peter, and you guys are really lucky to have this like global leader and thought leader on this whole subject right here in town, to kind of have the answer to what to do. And I think really my hope is that we've informed and inspired you about some of the possibilities so that you all can answer the question as to what do we want. And as you start to get down that, any of us can work with you on kind of helping that. But time is of the essence. The federal tax credit, the ITC, is scheduled to start decreasing over time. So it's at its highest level right now. And then there's also another bill which we just passed, SB 700 in California, which extends the SGIP program, which is the Self-Generation Incentive Program, and that provides I think it's a rebate.
So rebate for batteries.
If you install batteries with your, and then also the IRS just ruled that if you retrofit solar with batteries, you can get the ITC on just that.
ITC is an income tax credit, right?
ITC is a tax credit, yes, a federal tax credit. So anyway, the timing's good now that the savings are kind of in our favor.
I want to say one quick thing. And as far as the timing being important, I'm sure you all know about the new IPCC report that came out that says we really need to decarbonize our society as soon as possible. And that's, everything that we're talking about, it's dollars and cents, and it actually pencils out really well now. That's what we're all trying to kind of get across. But the societal imperative is that we need to decarbonize. And what we're talking about doing is electrifying our communities locally, providing local jobs, and decarbonizing the environment at the same time.
I want to add in a little thing. I'm a big fan of NOVA, and I saw this great documentary the other day. Sometimes I look at this issue, this global issue of reducing carbon emissions, and just seeing how the vast majority of the 7 billion people on the planet and growing, they're interested in the moment. They're interested in right now, and greed unfortunately drives so much of the big decisions, and it seems impossible sometimes, but it's doable. There was an issue that came up, I'm sure you all remember, the ozone hole, and we absolutely cut CFCs, period, done, they're gone, okay? And it's been making a positive difference. So it seems very difficult, but we all need to do our part, and everybody here, This is the smartest, most affluent part of the entire planet. And if we're not going to do it, and we're not going to start, who is? So just wanted to point that out. It is possible.
Yes, good. And on a positive note, I also want to let you know that all of the contact information of everybody on this panel, there were some handouts here. Looks like there's still a few left, so hopefully it looks like people grab those. And I guess with that, why don't we just wind down the public presentation, but we'll linger, and if you want to talk to a specific person here, get their business card or whatever, go for it. There's still, I think, some food back there. We're welcome.
And thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Peter.